Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Lemon, product marketing engineer with the VCS division here at Broadcom, and I want to welcome you to part two of our three-part series where we're going to align VMware Cloud Foundations costing and pricing capabilities to the FinOps or the financial operations process with some practical use case scenarios. And as you recall in point one, we actually walk through the capabilities that allow you to visualize and adjust your costs. And so in part two, today, what we're going to do is we're going to actually extend upon the cost optimization capabilities that allow you to really more seamlessly transition into the phase two of the FinOps process, where you're going to be taking advantage of VCF's cost planning capabilities. And so again, here's a reminder, right? Here are the objectives that we're looking to achieve by the end of this session here. Being able to understand the FinOps process, being able to confidently identify the three FinOps maturity phases, being able to use VCF to track your total cost of ownership, develop skills for cost optimization and budget management. We're going to be able to, in this particular session at least, talking about planning your infrastructure, your workload, and your migration planning. We're going to be able to do a lot of that stuff. And then last but not least, just implement various pricing policies for things like show back and charge back in the automated billing, which we're going to be looking at in part three. And so with that, let's just go ahead and jump into part two of this series. So, like I said, we just finished part one, so we officially have the here and now under control, right? So now it's time to start to think ahead, because the cheapest way to handle costs is to avoid it in the first place. So if phase one is about turning on the lights so that you can see what's in a room, phase two is like rearranging the furniture and decluttering the room so it's easier to move around and use that space efficiently, right? And so as you navigate through this phase to support strategic IT investments, you're going to need infrastructure and workload planning tools and even migration capabilities, quite frankly, to answer questions related to forecasting and capacity needs. You're going to be able to plan purchases before you hit a wall and avoid those costly emergency buys. You're going to be able to say, for example, take into account, running what if scenarios, test moves like shifting dev or test to the public cloud or adding new projects, or even taking into account, planning migrations, understanding the cost and the capacity impact of moving these workloads between, different clouds of data centers and things along those lines. And so again, just like before, this is where VMware Cloud Foundation can help, because it has features, again, that are tailor-made to answer these questions. And so what we're getting ready to do right now, we're going to look at each one of these in more detail, starting with its workload planning capabilities. And so let's just talk about infrastructure planning, right? And so, you may be faced with the scenario where you're starting a new project, or you're ending an existing one. And so you may have to ask yourself, what's the financial impact of either one of these scenarios? And so with VCF, you can actually answer that question, because with it, you can do cost and capacity planning for both traditional and hyperconverged infrastructures. You're able to use predictive what if scenarios that can be combined and ran against infrastructure resources to really determine the cost of adding new hosts or removing these existing ones, right? And so let's just take a look at a scenario where we're starting a new project. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get an assessment of my current capacity. And after checking, it appears that I'm going to be running out of capacity in 109 days. And so let's just see the financial impact of adding a new host with our infrastructure planning tool. And so as I'm creating this what if scenario, I'm specifying the location of my host, complete with server details such as my make, my model, my CPU, memory core, and all that, right? And even cost. And after running the scenario, it immediately is going to display my results. And so in this case, $2,600. That investment is going to extend my CPU and my memory capacity for over a year. And of course, this what if scenario can be shared with my extended team for consideration before committing to move forward with the addition of the new host to support this new project, right? And Inversely, there's also workload planning. And with workload planning, what's really, really great about this is that you can actually get in front of planning for new VMs or people, and even the addition of new services, right? So do you need to know the impact of, adding new people or VMs, removing team members of those VMs, or whether or not, all of them were a fit into an existing or a new cluster, right? And so with VCF, you can foresee all these costs and again avoid those urgent last minute emergency buys, which are always much more expensive, and you're able to avoid downtime if any of this were to take place, right? I'm talking about those capacity shortages and things along those lines. So let's just take a look at a situation where we're onboarding a new team that'll need VMs to support their business applications. And of course, before we commit to any plans, whether we're looking at working within our existing environment by simply adding new VMs or hosts to an existing cluster that we already have available, or if we're considering the option of adding a completely new set of VMs to an entirely new cluster, VCF can help us understand the financial impact of additional workloads for both options so that we're making an informed decision here. So let's just walk through the process of creating the scenario that I just described. So I'm going to specify a location, and then I'm going to tell VCF that I want to explore the option of adding a completely new cluster, complete with new servers. And as I'm specifying the details and including information on the type of servers that I like, I also want to point out that VCF isn't actually creating anything yet. I'm simply adding this information for testing purposes, if you will. Now I'm going to finish up my scenario by adding my details about the workload that I have, and then I'm running the scenario. And in this case, VCF is telling me that the scenario won't work based on the parameters that I provided, but it does give me a recommendation on how to achieve my goal. And I also want to point out that if my scenario did work, VCF would also tell me if I could accomplish the same with less servers. And so with that, let's just go ahead and adjust my scenario to align with VCF's recommendation by increasing the number of servers to 3. So let's just go ahead and edit this. We're going to go ahead and bump that up to 3, and then we're going to run it again. And as you can imagine, the updated workload planning scenario does fit, and VCF also breaks down the cost. And again, these results can be exported for reporting purposes before I commit to the scenario and actually make the plan real. Or perhaps you've wondered how much the cost would be if you moved workloads across different data centers and clusters in your private cloud. And with VCF, you can evaluate the possibility again of moving those workloads across those different data centers or those clusters, right? And so what's really, really great about this, everyone, is that you can actually compare the cost of your workloads across various data centers to really help you optimize and decide on the best fitting data center for the workload that you're considering. So let's just see this feature in action. So I'm going to go back to my planning tool, and I'm going to create a new what-if scenario that will allow me to see the cost of moving my workloads to 3 different data centers that I'm considering. And as I walk through the process, I'm going to give my scenario a name. I'm going to select the data centers that I would like to include in the comparison. And I can configure a new application profile where I can specify the detail of my workloads, or I can import an existing one so that I can take advantage of that as well. And as you can imagine, costs vary from one data center or another depending on the costs and drivers and facility, all those different types of costs, right? And so what's really, really great about this data center comparison tool is that I can actually select the data center that suits my requirements, the one that's the least expensive and has the adequate capacity. And with this concludes part 2 of our FinOps series. Be sure to check out part 3, where we're going to look at how VCF and its FinOps capabilities can help you run IT like a business.